What did we do yesterday? So we completed till lab number 7, which is enable multi-factor authentication. And yeah, lab number 7, 8, multi-factor authentication. We completed here. Do I have any question from any participants with respect to multi-factor authentication in terms of how do we configure multi-factor authentication? What are various authentication methods which are available? How do you configure those authentication methods and enable them for your end users or identities? So your identities can actually leverage those authentication methods to configure multi-factor authentication for their sign-ins. Any question on multi-factor authentication, guys?
No. From my end.
Okay, great. Let's move on. So when it comes to multi-factor authentication, one thing that we did not discuss yesterday was passwordless authentication. Let's talk about what passwordless authentication is, and then we will move on to the next topic. All right. So let's understand the passwordless authentication part. I'll explain that from Entra. Hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes.
Okay. So when it comes to, so these are the authentication methods basically. And as I explained yesterday, that if you have a Entra free license, you would only be able to configure authentication with MFA with Microsoft Authentication. However, if you have P1, P2 license, you can also take advantage of additional features. You can even configure self-service password reset that we will do today. So you will have access to additional features basically when you have P1, P2 license. Now that we all have P1, P2 license, we can basically configure these additional authentication methods. Some authentication methods require additional configuration. For example, certificate-based authentication would require you to procure certificates from a CA. You can build internal CA or you can use third-party CA. Voice call would basically require integration with a service provider that it is chargeable. Similarly, hardware or tokens, passkey, all of this requires some hardware devices that you will need to procure and configure in with your Entra ID so that you can make use of these devices. A couple of things that is available free of cost. For example, SMS, email OTP, and Microsoft Authenticator. They are available free of cost. You actually don't need to spend money to configure it. Now, when it comes to configuring these solutions, you can configure these solutions. All you need to do, you just need to navigate to that specific setting and you can enable that solution. And after that, you can select the target. Who do you want to configure it? So here you select the target and you just click on save. If you want to provide additional configuration details, you can look for configure and provide additional configuration details. Same is the case for authenticator. When it comes to authenticator based MFA, in authenticator, you have an option to configure authenticator for one of the three methods, which is any, passwordless, or push. Push basically means that the user on his or her authenticator app will get a notification which says, are you trying to sign in? And you just need to say yes, and it will work. Any basically means that authenticator uses the code option. Authenticator uses authenticator provides you a 6-digit OTP. You can put that OTP. Authenticator also provides you numbers on the screen that you need to match with your authenticator app. You need to type. So Microsoft, the Entra will show you some numbers, typically a 2-digit number. You will need to type that into the authenticator. And this is the passwordless, the one that I'm talking about. So what happens in passwordless, it when you configure passwordless and enable for your users do not need to provide passwords when they type in, when they try to sign into Entra ID or Azure portal, M365 portal, admin portal, or any application that accepts authentication with Microsoft Entra ID, which is registered as enterprise application or app registration. It would not require password. That's what passwordless is. Now, passwordless is gaining momentum because there has been a lot of passwords these days with users, and it is really difficult to manage all the passwords. And you can't configure single sign-on with all the applications. So passwordless method is becoming very popular because it also avoids administrative overhead. It also avoids the trouble of remembering multiple passwords. So let's understand passwordless authentication and what are the options available for passwordless in Microsoft Entra ID. So this is the article for passwordless authentication. I'll put that into the chat window. It is also configured here. It is also here. Okay, let's understand the context here. So this image basically says it all. This image says that if you are using passwords are low security. They are low in security because you may not be putting in strong passwords that you can't remember. And you can't use a phone book wherein you save your contact information, keep it handy. You can't do that. You can use a password vault, but at the end of the day, it would require an additional investments. We are talking about a solution that doesn't require additional investments, which is part of your purchase already, and that basically saves you from hassle. So what this image says that if you look at passwords, they could be convenient. However, they are also low in security. Then if you look at password plus two-factor authentication, the one that we configured yesterday, wherein other than providing credentials, user is challenged with providing additional authentication in the form of an OTP, in the form of accepting a push notification from Entra or providing an email, OTP or phone OTP. This is a bit inconvenient. I'm saying this is good for security, but at the same time, this is inconvenient. It is secure, but it is inconvenient. So what is my option, which is convenient as well as secure? This is the option, which is passwordless. So what it says that if you use passwordless authentication, it is equally convenient and high security because passwordless authentication would require the same authentication method and it saves user from typing the password. It doesn't mean that password will not exist. User can always type the password when they don't have access to passwordless authentication device. If they don't have access to don't have access to authenticator app, they can use passwords as a backdoor mechanism to enter into the system. So that option is very much possible. However, passwordless authentication is secure as well as convenient when you have multiple applications. So how do we configure passwordless authentication? These are the options. These are the solutions that can help you configure passwordless. The first solution is Windows Hello for Business. Laptops which are quite, I would say, a bit expensive. Those contains biometric capability on the hardware. They can be configured with passwordless authentication using Windows Hello for Business. It's a feature in Microsoft Windows 10 and 11 client operating system with enterprise. So it is not available in Windows 10 Home and Basic. It is available in enterprise. So if you have Windows 10 and 11 laptop and desktop that contains enterprise version that is joined to your Active Directory domain, which is synchronized with Entra ID, or your devices are directly joined to Microsoft Entra domain service. In both the cases, you can use Windows Hello for Business. You can also use platform credentials for Mac OS if you're using Mac systems. These are the two options for Mac systems. Then we have Microsoft Authenticator. If in case we want to configure it on our mobile phones, you can also deploy Authenticator in a laptop and desktop. Passkey, which is again a hardware solution, and certificate-based authentication. So these are my methods or authentication options that I can configure passwordless with. So this is about passwordless, and this is gaining popularity. I have recently configured it for, I did configure it a long time back in 2020 for Standard Chartered Bank. But recently, I was approached by a customer from the same banking domain. They also want to deploy passwordless and roll out to their 10,000 plus employees across multiple cities. So we are currently working on the rollout strategy and trying to, this would require some prerequisites with respect to Active Directory configuration. So we are currently working on to fix the prerequisites with respect to Active Directory configuration. And next month, I will have some bandwidth wherein I will spend time with their team and plan for rollout of this solution. Based on the stages, based on certain stages or cities that they have basically prioritized. So that's about passwordless. It's simple to configure. All you need to do in your Authenticator app, this is how it happens. You will see a number on the screen that you need to type on your mobile app, and user will be signing in. So on this page, you see all the passwordless authentication methods and how once configured, how are they behaving, what exactly is the user flow, all that is mentioned along with the explanation here. So I would highly recommend that you go through this article in your spare time and see if any of these methods would make sense to you, and if you would like to propose the same to your customers if they are not using passwordless already. This also shows you a table which will help you to prepare, which will help you to decide on a passwordless method, whether you want to go for Windows Hello for Business Authenticator app or FIDO security keys, because they are the three main solutions that most of the customers go with. And if you want to configure it for phone-based passwordless sign in with Authenticator app, here's the article. This article shows you step by step to configure it. So you can follow this article that will help you to configure passwordless authentication. You would require password application policy administrator role, which is a bare minimum requirement. You all have global admin, so you will be able to configure it. All you need to do, you can see, you need to go to authentication methods, policies, select Microsoft Authenticator, select enable, take a target, start with some test users. Do not roll it out to all the users in one go. Test the behavior with some selected users. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. When I showed you the configuration, I have tested this behavior with this group of users first. And then once the test results are satisfactory, then you can roll it out to the entire environment by clicking on all users if you want to do it in one go, or you can add groups one by one and roll it out in phases. But this is a great method. And the best part is it says this app is free to download and use on Android. So Authenticator is free. And this method doesn't require P1, P2 license. You can use this method. Some capabilities obviously require P1 license, but at least passwordless with Authenticator doesn't require any additional cost. So you can configure it. It says each added groups or user is enabled by default to use Microsoft Authenticator in both passwordless and push notification modes. Any mode. To change the mode for each row for authentication mode, choose any, or passwordless, choose push prevents. Choosing push prevents the use of password-less phone sign-in credentials. So you will not to use push, either choose any or use passwordless. That's it. Save it. Once you save it, then user need to register. User will register for passwordless. It is not that you will save it and it will be enabled for passwordless. Then user will register. So it says user registers themselves for passwordless authentication method of Microsoft Entra ID. For users who are already registered with Microsoft Authenticator app, skip to the next level and enable phone signing. How user will register? User will register with this option. So user will basically navigate to aka.ms my security info, where user will add method, user will add authenticator app, and user will configure phone sign. So that's how passwordless authenticator will work. I'm saying in this article, they basically shows you the process of configuring in passwordless authenticator, which is a simple process. However, there has been I'm telling you by my experience that I've noticed that once you configure passwordless authentication, it takes a couple of hours for it to get enabled. It will be configured. However, user will continue to get prompted for password for some time. And then within a couple of hours, it will get automatically enabled. And since it is passwordless, on the screen where it says passwordless, user will always have an option to, to provide, to provide another authentication method, which is password. If user doesn't have access to, if user doesn't have access to authenticator app, user can also provide the password. So that's what passwordless is. Any question on this, guys? I'll put that into the chat window also.
Hi, Raghuveer.
Yes, Reshma.
Yeah. So, is there any relation with this SSPR, with this passwordless authentication?
There are two different, two different services. Passwordless authentication basically means that it is not asking, it is not giving you prompt for typing the password, right? However, your password will definitely expire on one day, which is as per the password policy of the organization, the password will expire probably 60 days, 90 days. When that password expires, then passwordless will also stop working, because passwordless will assume that your password is active. I'm saying for passwordless authentication to work, your password must remain active. Your password must not expire. If it expires, then you will need to reset your password. To reset your password, you will need to approach help desk. You will give them a call and say, hey, this is my ID. My password is not working. They'll check in the system and say your password is expired, and they will reset your password, provide you a temporary password that you will use to create a permanent password. And then the authenticator app, when you sign in, will ask you for the new password. Once it gets the new password, then it will once again go into passwordless authentication mode. So yes, password is needed to remain active all the time. That's the first thing. Second, what self-service password reset is doing? SSPR is basically helping you to reset your password yourself, rather approaching help desk to for them to reset your password, which may result in delay, which may result in productivity loss. What if you need access to your account at 2 o'clock in the morning and your help desk only functions within business hours? Then you can't log into your system because your password, either you don't remember the password or your password is expired. So self-service password reset basically helps you to reset your password yourself. That's the benefit of self-service password reset, which is our next lab that we are going to do. So I'll share this information with you. Now, what you need to do, first, we need to understand the concept. After you have good clarity, good understanding of the concept, then you will need to go ahead and perform this lab, which is enable users to unlock their account or reset passwords using Microsoft Entra self-service password reset, which is known as SSPR. In short, we call it SSPR. Now, for SSPR to work, SSPR is available as you don't need a license for it. SSPR is by default available. Please go through this article, give it 5 minutes, and then you will understand the concept. Then I will show you how do we configure passwordless self-service password reset capability. After that, I would request you all to go ahead and do this lab and test it with a test user. So identify a user from your Entra, tenant, from your directory. You will configure passwordless. You will configure self-service password reset capability as an admin. Enable the configuration. Then you will enable it for a user. You will use that user credentials to actually register for it, and then you will test the validity of this capability. That's what you're going to do. So
Raghuveer,
yes,
in the beginning, you showed a quadrant where it says passwordless is convenient and more security.
yeah.
But I didn't get it because let's say I'm using my password plus MFA already, which most of the customers are using. How can we kind of differ this passwordless is more secure than two-factor authentication?
The passwordless, see, as I said, for passwordless to work, your password must remain active. It is not
Yes.
that you completely forget your password. Your password has to be there. When you don't have access to passwordless authenticate, see, understand the concept. When there are multiple passwords, it becomes difficult to remember those passwords, right?
Right.
This is where
Right.
inconvenience is.
Correct.
And when you have Microsoft Authenticator configured as password less authentication, then it becomes easier for you to quickly sign into an application, right? Now it is secure because Microsoft Authenticator app is only configured on your device. It is not, it is, hacker doesn't have access to it. So hacker would not be able to use the application to gain access to your system. That is where it is secure. That's what the concept is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Raghu.
Right? Or you can read this line. This basically helps you understand the concept. It says passwordless authentication methods are more convenient because the password is removed and replaced with something that you already have or something that you know. And it says password, features like MFA are great way to secure organizations, but users often get frustrated with extra security layer on the top of having to remember their passwords. That's where, so I'm not saying here that you will forget your password. No, you will not forget your password because there could be some applications which are not authenticated with Entra. For those applications, you will be typing your password plus authentication, or maybe only password, no authentication. So password will always be there in the system. It's just that you will not be prompted for typing the password all the time for applications that you want to configure for passwordless, because you use those applications every now and then, most of the time. That's the concept.
Yeah. Thank you, Raghu.
All right, let's understand the process, guys, for self-service password reset. How do we enable self-service password reset? For enabling self-service password reset, you can enable, okay, let me close this. Okay, when you want to enable self-service password reset, there are two options. You can navigate to protection on Entra Admin Center, navigate to protection, and then there is an option that says password reset. Click on this option, and over here, you just need to enable this setting. It says self-service password reset enabled. Right now it says none, selected, all. That's the setting. So this is under identity protection and then password reset, this setting. If you want to enable it from Entra, then you will find it under password protection. Not here. So with two portals, they have moved things here and there. Okay, give me a moment. Let me search for it then. over here. You click on identity protection and then you hit protect, and then you will find it here at one of the option: conditional user rights policy, sign-in policy, multi-factor registration policy, risky users, risky sign-in, risky detections, weekly digest. Okay, no worries. You do it from here. I'll tell you where exactly it is in the old portal. So in the Entra Admin Center, you basically need to navigate to protection. Under protection, you will see an option that says password reset. In password reset, the first which says properties, here you will need to click on select it. When you select, you can enable this for everyone. However, never do that. First, test the behavior. This is a thumb rule of IT. Whenever you are rolling out a new change in the environment, just identify some test users and check the behavior and expectation of that change with those test users. And once you have satisfactory results, then go ahead and roll it out for everyone. So what we will do, if you want to enable it, we will enable it for a selected group of users. You will click on this. Right now it says all 00, which means nobody selected. Select it and then select a group of members for which you will enable self-service password reset. You can select group here and type the group name, whichever group you want to enable it for. For example, this group Dynamics demo, and select it and save it. That's the first step. So password reset policy saved. Now you need to remember a couple of things while you are doing it. So now that this is enabled for this group, however, you also need to go to the next wherein you need to configure the authentication methods. Now, when users are resetting their password, when they click on forget the password and when they reset it, it could be a hacker also. See, email IDs are typically the login credentials in most of the organizations. Login username is email address. And on the same screen, let's say I have a user. A user is trying to sign in. Now, this is where user is being asked for the password. Now, this is common for everyone. Anyone can reach to this screen and click on forgot password. So when somebody clicks on forgot password, the person will be, I'm saying, just to make sure that it's not a bot, it's not a robot, it's a human being. It will ask you for, it will ask you to provide the challenge. So let's say 4L6YYN. I hope this is not case sensitive. All right. It says what? Get back into your account. We are sorry. You can't reset your own password because password reset isn't turned on for your account. So this user can't reset the password because we have not enabled self-service password reset for this user yet, or the group that this user is part of is not added into SSPR capability. This user can't reset the password. However, a user which is part of that group, let's go back to the same here, and we've enabled this for a group which is Dynamics users. Dynamics demo. And this, oh, unfortunately, this group has no member. Let me add one member to this group. Okay, you can't add members to this group because it's a dynamic group. So based on the group membership rule, the members will be added, right? So I will probably look for other group. let's say sample group. I don't have a member here, so I will add members to this group. I can't add members to this group because this group is sample group is basically synchronized from on-premises, hence you can't member. You can't change the group membership of a group which is getting synchronized from on-premises. But I have two cloud groups, which is there is one cloud group which is Farhan Practice. This group already has members, which is Farhan Ahmed and try.com, try.com. So what I will do, I will use this group here. All right, this group is added. I'll just refresh the screen for these settings to take effect. All right, so this group is added and Farhan is part of this group. So I'll navigate to users. Farhan. All right. He's part of two groups. Farhan Practice, he's part of. All right. So with this user, I'll try to sign in. And I say, let's do it. So I don't remember the password. Now I could be a hacker also. Type this and see. Since we have reset, we have configured self-service password reset for this group, Farhan is getting an option. Now, what options Farhan will get to reset the password depends on what you will configure as an admin here, which is the next option, authentication methods. This is where you will configure the options, that what options Farhan will get. So it says number of methods required to reset. Number of methods. Number of methods are 1, which is email and mobile phone, right? Now, when it comes to mobile phone, it by default includes, you can see here, mobile phone notification, office phone, it by default includes this. So Farhan can reset the password by using one of these options, which is email or mobile phone, which is exactly what he's getting here. He can use verification code, enter a code on the authenticator app because on authenticator app is installed on the mobile phone. Now, the other thing is for this user, we've also configured, this user is also configured for multi-factor authentication, wherein the user has already configured authenticator app for MFA. So user will be given one prompt. Now, why user is not getting the prompt for these options, which is one of these options, email, why user is not getting email option here? Because after you configure self-service password reset for a user or a group, that user or group members, they need to register for it. They will register for SSPR and they will provide information based on what you have configured here. So let's say I configure authentication methods. Now there are 2 methods to reset, and I will select security questions also. And I'll say that number of security questions required to register is 5. Number of questions required to reset is, let's say, 4. It says no security questions configured. I will need to configure the questions then also. So I will configure all of it and save it. Once I save this information, then the next step for the user is to register for self-service password reset. User will register for it, and then user will provide the information that user will use to reset the password. That's the second option. The third option is understand all the options and then you will do. The third option is registration. It says require users to register when sign in. Yes. users are required to register for self-service password reset. Number of days before users are asked to reconfirm their authentication information. Every 180 days, when users are registered for SSPR, every 180 days, we typically keep it 60 days in production environment. Every 60 days, user will be asked to reconfirm their SSPR information with respect to their email address, if there is any change, with respect to their phone number, if there is any change, with respect to their authenticator app, if there is any change. That's the registration option. Then comes notification. In notifications, it says notify users and password resets. Every time a user is resetting the password or a hacker is resetting the password on user's behalf, then the user will get notified. Notify all admins when other admins reset their password. Now, SSPR doesn't apply for admins. By default, admin can reset their password all the time. It doesn't apply for admins. So when an admin password is reset by another admin, you could have multiple global admins in your account. When a global admin's password is reset by another global admin, then you want to notify all admins or not, so that all other admins are notified that this password was changed. So that's yes, no, you need to select here. Then comes customization. Customization basically means that you can customize help desk link here. Let's say user is trying to use self-service password reset to reset the password, but somehow user is not able to do that because probably user is not typing the password that matches your password policy, or user is finding some difficulty. Then you can put the help desk email or URL here that user will see on self-service password reset page, wherein if user is unsuccessful in resetting the password, user can use this email address or URL and approach the help desk. Next is on-premise integration. This on-premise integration is only possible when you have password write-back enabled. If you have not enabled password write-back, then this on-premise integration will not work. So it says, unfortunately, it looks like we can't connect to your on-premise write-back client right now. Why? Because the virtual machine, the Active Directory Domain Service VM, on which Entra Connect Sync is installed, is currently shut down in my environment. To save cost, I am keeping it in shutdown mode. So both the VMs are shut down. That is why the synchronization is not happening any further, and that's the reason they are giving me this. They are giving me this error that we can't connect. So we can't connect, so we can't verify whether write-back is enabled or not. Right? It says connect provisioning agent is not detected. Setup was complete. It knows that you did synchronize on-premises identities with Entra, probably this week. However, right now as we speak, it is not detected. So it says enable password write-back for sync users. Password write-back is compulsory for SSPR to work for on-premise users. Otherwise, on-premise users will not be able to reset their password, because if they are able to reset the password, that password needs to replicate back to on-premises AD. Otherwise, applications which authenticate with on-premises AD will stop working for those users, because users will type the new password. Application would expect the old password that user probably doesn't remember or user has stopped using. So that's the other thing that you need to remember. So these are all the options which you need to know about SSPR. Next is administrator policy. This is nothing but the summary of what you have just configured, which is self-service password reset enabled? Number of methods right now, 1. See, when the authentication methods come, when I selected 2, I did not save it. So if I save it, then it will be 2 now. So if I go back, now it will refresh to 2, number of methods to reset, and then what are the available methods, which is email, phone, mobile app code. So this is about it. Audit log basically tells you whether this self-service password reset policy is being used, who is using it. It says success, failure, all that information. For example, there was a user who was trying to, the user is not a member of password policy. So you will see all the logs here with respect to this policy. Usage and insights, if you want to see how many users have actually registered for SSPR, whether they are using SSPR capabilities or not. success, failure, all that information you will see here. That's it. In the end, if any of these information does not make sense to you, you need more help, click on new support request. Microsoft will come to your rescue and help you. So this is about self-service password reset capability. Now let's go ahead and do this lab. Before you do this lab, let me know if you have any questions, guys.
Raghavi, I
Yes.
had come across a scenario where the UPN and the email address of a user were different. So when we had tried to do the SSPR, add that user to the group where SSPR is configured, he was not able to do the password reset. He was given you're not eligible for doing it, and please contact the support is what it was given. So
Okay.
would that see if the UPN and the email are different, would that be a cause of concern when it comes to this SSPR?
Absolutely. Provided if in case email is registered as one of the method in SSPR. If email is
Okay.
also registered as one of the authentication method in SSPR, then there is a challenge. Because by default, what happens, UPN and email address should remain the same, right? Because
Okay.
it is not for SSPR, it is also for SSO. If you've configured
Uh-huh.
SAML 2.0, then SAML 2.0 has heavy dependency on email address and UPN. It has to be the same. So it is not that SSPR would fail for that user. I'm sure other capabilities also would not work for that user.
Okay.
Right? So it is, yes, it is needed. And in SSPR case, if email address is registered as method, that is why it is needed. So if you want that to work for that user in SSPR setting, for that user, you just need to remove email as one of the authentication method. Just keep phone there. So when you keep phone, then user will be able to reset the password. But this would still be a misconfiguration that you would definitely
Have
need
to
to
address.
fix. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So we are actually moving the devices from on-prem to through Intune enrollment. So with that, we do this activity of consistency with the UPN and the email. So
Yeah.
hopefully that
Intune
should
would need it.
fix the issue, right?
Yeah, Intune would not work if that is the if there are if there are inconsistency, then Intune would also not work here. A lot of Intune policy will stop working for that user. I'm saying that is a risky user for you now. Okay, so you need to fix it. Hope that makes sense, Reshma.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. So guys, let's look at the lab real quick. In the lab, the first thing that you do, you basically navigate. In the first lab, you basically identify a group. So what you're doing in the lab, you're creating a group with the name SSPR, and then you will add a couple of members in that group. If you already have this configured in your environment, which I believe so, skip the exercise first. Directly go to exercise. Skip the task first in the exercise 1. Directly go to task 2, wherein you will need to enable SSPR for your group. Identify a group, enable SSPR. Once SSPR is enabled, it says you will need to look for other options also that I've already explained what those options are. And then identify one of the user who is part of this group and go ahead and configure the SSPR for it. So how do we configure SSPR? That user will type https:// aka.ms SSPR setup. So user types here, user configures SSPR with this, wherein user if MFA is enabled for the user, obviously user needs to go through MFA, and then user will see a screen for configuring the SSPR. So for example, if I want to show you SSPR setup, so I don't have, I don't want to reset Farhan's password because he's actually using it for some applications. So no worries, you can try it yourself. So you just need to type this URL and sign in with that user, which is part of this test group. And you will see a screen like this, wherein you will have multiple options to configure. User will see multiple options. There will be an option that says password. When user clicks on it, user will be asked to change the password. So that's what SSPR is. And if you want to test it, this is so then in this screen, user will basically configure the options based on what admin has enabled. For example, if admin has enabled email, if admin has enabled phone, if admin has enabled security questions, user will provide all of this information while doing SSPR setup. Once SSPR setup is complete, and if you want to test in the window itself, there is an option with the name password. You can use that to change the password. Or if you want to test it outside of that window, then user can directly try to log in to portal.azure.com and then click on reset password. If SSPR is enabled and configured for the user will get an option like this, wherein based on what user has configured, user will be prompted to select the options. So if admin has configured one option, then user can choose any one of them. If admin has configured two options like email OTP and phone code, then user has to provide both the code from phone, which is from Authenticator app, or email OTP also at the same time, depending on how many options admin has configured here. So this is all about SSPR. And once you are satisfied with the SSPR option, it says what happens if you try a user not an SSPR group. As a test, open a name private window, try to log in Azure portal with this user and select forgot my password option. So this user, Grady A, is not part of this group actually. You can see Grady A is not part of that group. So exactly what will happen? What happened for Radha? When Radha was trying to sign in, it says that we are sorry, password reset capability is not configured for you. So any user for whom it is not configured will get an error. Any user for whom it is configured will be given an option to get back to their account. So it's as simple as that. However, it's a great tool that helps reduce admin work as well as help desk calls. So guys, I'll give you 15 minutes. Let's quickly complete this lab and then we will move on to the next topic. If you're done with it, if you have any questions, please ask me, or you can ask later also. You have entire weekend with you. Go ahead and practice all the labs that we have completed so far. And if you have any questions, please share it with me on Monday. All right, so that's about SSPR, which is very simple to configure. Involves 3 stages. Admin configures SSPR with test users, test groups. Users from that group registers for SPR, and then they try to reset the password. Once all is documented as expected, then you roll out SSPR for the entire organization. So that's about SSPR. Let's move on. So after SSPR, how do we implement password protection? That's another thing. So basically what happens, similar to on-premises Active Directory domain services, you also have password protection capabilities available in Entra, wherein you can configure the passwords and you can protect those passwords here. So this is the place where you can do this configuration here. You will need to navigate to authentication methods. Under authentication methods, you see password protection. So let's talk about it. So let's say if you want to configure password protection for Entra users. This is primarily for cloud users, not for on-premises identities. How do we configure it? We basically need to go to under identities, you need to navigate to protection. In protection, you see authentication methods. Click on authentication methods, and then the next option is password protection. Click on password protection, and you will see the screen. On this screen, you can configure password protection. So it starts with lockout threshold. Lockout threshold basically means after how many unsuccessful passwords or sign-in attempts, the account will get locked out. So the account gets logged out after 10 unsuccessful sign-in attempts. Lockout duration, for how long the account will remain logged out. By default, it is 60 seconds, and it proportionally increases with every lockout attempt. So it says the minimum length in seconds, which is 60 seconds, which is 1 minute. And then with every subsequent lockout, it says if an account locks repeatedly, this duration increases for that account only. By default, it is 60 seconds, 1 minute. Custom ban passwords. What if you don't want your employees, your identities, to choose a password that has been reported to be compromised? There are list of passwords over the net which are compromised. You don't want your employees to choose those passwords. You can select yes, and you can put those passwords here. For example, Indian at 2024, Contoso, Fabricam, catch me if you can, #2024. These are all lists. I'm saying you cannot have more than 16 characters because that's the policy. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that here you can put all the banned passwords which you have received from your cyber threat intel. You can put those passwords one at a line, and there is no limit. You can keep putting any number of passwords here, and you can always come back to this window and add more passwords whenever you are reported by security team of additional passwords that have been banned. So this is where you can configure it. When it comes to password protection, now when it comes to the when it comes to the limit, that what should be the minimum limit, what should be the maximum limit of password. The minimum is 7 characters when it comes to Entra. When you create a password for an identity, you should give a minimum of 7 characters, a combination of uppercase and lowercase, and one number, one numeral, and one special character. That's the prerequisite. The maximum is not defined in Entra. It could be any limit. It could be a string of any length that is not defined in Entra. Then password protection for Windows Server Active Directory. The Active Directory services, the virtual machines which are holding Windows Server Active Directory, do you want to enable password protection for them also? Yes, it will be enabled here. So all virtual machines which are, all virtual machines which are holding Windows Server Active Directory, and they are registered with the same domain, which is the primary domain in Entra, or they are registered with Entra domain services, Entra directory domain services, they will be protected with the same policy, which means on those also, after 10 unsuccessful attempts, the account will be logged out for 60 seconds. When you try to reset the password, you will not be able to use these passwords. That will be done. And for this, mode basically means that if you put it in audit mode, it will just make a record of the behavior from each identity. However, if you put it into enforce mode, this will be enforced. So that's the password protection. Now you have similar password protection policies for Active Directory domain services also, wherein you go to default domain policy. There you will see password protection policy. The password protection policy that you have at on-premises, the password protection policy that you have here, it must synchronize. It must be the same if you are managing hybrid identities. What if it is not the same? If it is not the same, then there will be misconfigurations. For example, what if you have password write back enabled for a user who uses SSPR to reset the password, and user creates a password which is not in sync with on-premises password policy. And since it's a hybrid identity with write back feature, that password is going to be synchronized with on-premises AD. Now, what will happen since it is not in sync with on-premises password policy? User will not get any trouble while user authenticates to Entra or any application which is registered with Entra. But when that user tries to sign in to an application which is configured with on-premises Active Directory, user will get a prompt. User will not be able to sign in because there will be issue with password. That is where I always say that decide on a central identity solution. Decide which is going to be your centralized identity solution. Make it Microsoft Azure and Microsoft Entra ID or on-premises. If you want to continue with on-premises Active Directory domain services as your centralized identity solution, do not configure password. I'm sorry. If you want to continue with on-premises, then configure password write back, and these settings then will not make effect. So you need to decide which is going to be your centralized identity management solution. If you ask me about the best practices, the best practice is with Microsoft Azure. If you are Azure heavy, then use Microsoft Entra ID as your, as your solution for managing identities, for managing identities in cloud. So this is the password protection, which is an important setting of Microsoft Entra that basically helps you to define the behavior of users when they are creating passwords, when they are managing passwords, when they are accessing applications, and if there are any issues in access, then this policy takes effect. Any question on this?
So, Raghu, yesterday also I had asked this question regarding whether is there a way to basically set, because its minimum number of characters is
It's 7.
7. Right? Yeah.
Maximum
So
I did not get it.
but if there is a way to basically uh increase it to 12 characters so we can enforce it for the applications in
No.
Entra, right? No.
I did not
Oh,
find any setting. In fact, I spoke with my Microsoft contact on the same, the one who I connect with. So I have direct contact with the Entra product management team. So I called up one of the person, not for this reason, for another POC that he said that this configuration is not available on the UI. I said, what if we can do something using PowerShell or CLI? He said, it is not available as we speak. However, it will be part of the same UI probably next couple of months. So you will find it over here itself. There will be an option that will define the minimum password length on this UI.
okay. So if there is this domain service, right? Entra domain service. So for the time being, would that be an option to do it? No.
In Entra domain service, no. In Entra domain service, you don't have that option. You will need to see it cannot happen that you are using both Active Directory domain service and Entra domain
Yeah.
service.
Correct.
Then it is like
Correct.
wastage of resources and licensing and money and
Yeah,
administrative
because
overhead.
even
Right?
domain services, you need a license for it to basically
Yep,
uh,
that's what I'm saying. It's a
use it.
wastage of resources and funds. So you are
Hmm.
either using you are using on-premises Active Directory plus Microsoft Entra ID or Microsoft Entra ID and Entra domain service. It cannot be both,
Okay.
right? So if you're using Entra domain service, then this is the screen. Because in Entra domain service also, it is the same issue.
Yeah, because this question why I asked is that this Intune, they wanted to create a certain policy. So the Intune person had come to me asking for this, can we create a policy in domain service, so that we can enforce this 12 characters requirement and all. So that is where I had this
Yeah,
question.
no, you can enforce this. See, understand. Uh, it is only not applicable for cloud identities. If
Okay,
there are cloud identities, and how many cloud identities would you have in your environment? Very limited.
correct.
When
Yeah.
you are using hybrid identities or when you are an organization with on-premises presence with Active Directory domain service in place, then majority of your identities are hybrid identities. You have a very limited number of cloud identities where this policy is not applicable. Because for on-premises identities, whatever policy you have configured in default domain service as password protection policy, that will take effect. This is only applicable for cloud identities that you are creating in cloud, and those
Uh,
numbers would always be limited, right?
so this is what we are doing for the password protection here. will only get applied for the cloud only entities, right?
Cloud identities. Cloud identities. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, cloud identities. So if it is a hybrid, and then if we have something, a policy um, related to password policy that is being set up in AD. So these
Yep.
hybrid uh, entities will take into consideration that policy, right? Which is there in AD.
On-premises policy only. Absolutely.
Okay, got it.
For hybrid identities, see, understand. For hybrid identities, you will not configure SSPR. SSPR is also a feature in on-premises Active Directory domain service. You will configure SSPR for hybrid identities in on-premises domain service. This SSPR you are configuring for cloud identities only. Take it this way. If you want to avoid confusion of password length, then you will configure SSPR, separate SSPR for cloud identities, separate SSPR for on-premises identities, which is already a feature in Active Directory domain service, right? The moment you configure SSPR for cloud, I'm saying you configure SSPR in Entra and allow your hybrid identities to leverage that SSPR capability with password write back enabled to change their password. And if there is a coincidence with on-premises password policy, that is where the challenge lies. So to avoid that challenge, you can have two different SSPR, separate SSPR for on-premises, separate SSPR for cloud. Then you will never have this password length issue.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to understand the limitation of a technology and figure out a solution, a workaround to achieve our business objectives. That's what I have learned throughout my career, because there will be limitations, there were limitations, and there are limitations. Things do not happen as we want them to when it comes to technology. So just understand the limitations and then look for a workaround, figure out a workaround that will also meet your business objectives. All right, let's move on. So this is the password protection capability that you need to be aware of. Next, Windows Hello for Business, I've already talked about. Now, very important aspect. There are times when identities are involved into when identities are compromised, and it is very much possible, it happens a lot in a production environment when identities are compromised. So what if my identities are compromised? What if I am reported about a brute force attack that is happening on my Azure portal, and a specific identity is involved in that attack? The identity is compromised. As a precaution, the first thing that I need to do is revoke user access. Revoke access of that identity, disable that identity, so there is no further damage to my system because of that identity. So how do I revoke user access in Microsoft Entra ID? Depending on who that identity is, if it's a federated identity, if that identity has access to multiple applications and systems in your network, you will configure it. So the easiest way to do it, you just need to, I'm saying, if it's an on-premises identity, then you will need to navigate to on-premises domain controller and run this PowerShell command, which is disable AD account and the AD account name. You will need to disable the account. First, disable the account. And then it says reset the user password twice in Active Directory. The reason for changing a user's password twice is to mitigate the risk of pass the hash, especially if there are delays in on-premises password replication. If you can safely assume this account isn't compromised, you may reset the password only once. So two-step process, disable the identity and then reset the password twice. When you reset the password twice, since password and hash synchronization is enabled, it will take time to replicate and that identity would lose access. That's one thing. If it's Microsoft Entra environment, if that user happens to be a cloud-only identity, then you can directly disable the user in Microsoft Entra. For that, you don't need to use this PowerShell. It's very simple. Just navigate to that user, any user that I want to disable, I'll just navigate to that user. Let's say Romesh Sharma. I see account status enabled. I'll just click on edit, uncheck this box and save it. That's it. The user is disabled. The moment user is disabled, all existing sessions that the user currently is maintaining, all tokens, all access will be disabled with immediate effect. So that way you can manage your environment. You can revoke user access in Microsoft Entra ID. And as I said, you will need to do this activity when you are being reported a user being included into compromised accounts. There could be a case of employee termination also and other inside threats. So this is the easiest way to do it. However, if you want to do it using PowerShell, you will, for Entra related activities, you will need Microsoft Graph PowerShell library, which you can install in your PowerShell. Just type import module Microsoft Graph, and then you can run these commands. All it requires is revoke. This command is revoke mg user sign in session user ID, and then you can provide the user ID, and you will be able to revoke this also. So read about this article and say, this is just small thing that you need to know. However, this really works well. Okay, now it is not that you need to manually remove it. You can also configure automation. For example, Microsoft Sentinel is cloud native or Microsoft native SIEM and source solution, which is primarily for security monitoring. If Microsoft Sentinel is reporting brute force attack happening on a device or on an application, which includes Azure Portal, M365 Portal, Admin Portal, Entra Admin Center, if it is happening on any application, Microsoft Sentinel has the capability to trigger a logic app workflow, and that workflow can look for the compromised account, the object ID actually, and then it will have the capability with appropriate access granted to logic app to quickly disable that user account as part of automation. So you don't need to do it manually, but if you are going to do it manually, then this is the options that you can follow. And this is something that you will find yourself doing as an admin most of the time when accounts and identities are compromised. Any question on this?
No recognition.
Okay, next. Next comes the authentication method. It's very important that you understand the authentication methods. There are multiple authentication methods which are available when it comes to hybrid identities. You will need to decide which authentication method is good in your case. So this article basically helps you with authentication method information. Question comes in the SE 300 exam on the authentication methods for hybrid identity solution. So if you look at authentication method, we have three types of authentication. One is cloud-based authentication. The other is federated authentication. And then we have Active Directory authentication. Okay. So authentication methods. So in cloud-based authentication, we have Microsoft Entra password hash synchronization that we have already seen. We have seen how password hash synchronization works. We have Microsoft Entra pass-through authentication also. These are two authentication methods in cloud-based authentication. So you can either have Microsoft Entra password hash synchronization authentication method configured or Microsoft Entra pass-through authentication. I've explained that in detail when we were doing hybrid identity scenario. Then comes federated authentication. Federated authentication basically means that you are either using Active Directory domain services or you have external identities that you federate with using OAuth authentication, or you federate them using single sign-on. So if that is the case, first of all, this is the decision tree that basically helps you to decide that based on the business requirements, what will be your final solution, whether you will go with password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication, or federation. For example, let's start. It says, do you want Entra ID to handle sign-in completely in the cloud? If you say yes, let Entra handle it. Next, do you want to enforce user level Active Directory security policies during sign-in? No, we don't want to use anything related to Active Directory. Next, do you have a sign-in requirement not natively supported by Entra ID? Any sign-in requirement that Entra ID natively doesn't support, which is the legacy protocol. So which means you want to go with cloud native. So the answer is password hash synchronization. Go with password hash synchronization. If the answer to this question, which is if you want native Active Directory security policies, on-premises directory security policies, then come to the right. Another question, do you have a sign-in requirement not natively supported by Entra ID? If the answer is yes, then come here. Do you have sign-in do you want sign-in disaster recovery or leak credential reports? If the answer is yes, then federation with password hash, because here you provide the report. If you don't need report, federation. And over here, do you want sign-in disaster recovery or leak credential reports? Yes, pass-through authentication. So this will help you to decide this flow chart. And then there's a table also that will help you to decide. So detailed consideration, in what scenarios you should be using password hash synchronization. It shows you the efforts that what it will take from administrative perspective, how the user experience will be, and what all advanced scenarios it will support, whether business continuity considerations. Similarly, if you are looking for pass-through authentication, it shows you the efforts that it will take to configure what will be the user experience at the end of the day, what all advanced scenarios it will support, whether it supports business continuity, and what additional considerations you need to look for. And the third one is rated authentication. Same efforts, user experience on the same parameters. It will help you decide. And in the end, architecture diagrams, which are very important. You can use these diagrams in your design. So the first diagram is for password hash synchronization, which is very simple. Active Directory identities are synchronized using Entra Connect Sync to Microsoft Entra ID. Users trying to sign in to Microsoft SaaS applications, they basically use Microsoft Entra ID and they're able to sign in. Pass-through authentication, Active Directory identities are synchronized through Microsoft Entra Sync to Microsoft Entra ID. When users try to sign in, Microsoft Entra ID communicates with authentication agents, which are nothing but domain controllers where Entra Connect Sync is deployed to ensure that the user is typing the right credentials. That's pass-through authentication. When it comes to federated authentication, they're giving the example of Active Directory Federation Service, wherein you have two roles, which is federation servers for internal application federation and federation proxy servers for external application. So if there is an internal user trying to authenticate to Entra ID or any service, then the federation server takes care of that request. If there is an external user outside of the corporate network trying to authenticate, then the federation proxy servers takes care of this request. The process remains the same. You can deploy this environment at on-premises. You can also deploy this environment in cloud also. So that's the federation part. So this article, the reason I'm sharing some specific articles with you, because they really contain good knowledge and that will help you in your projects when you're stuck with similar decisions and you're not sure on the factors that will help you to decide on these solutions. So these are the methods that you can compare, wherein what is my considerations and in which considerations I should take. For example, where the authentication happens. In password hash synchronization, it happens in the cloud. In pass-through authentication, you connect to cloud. However, the secure password verification exchange happens with on-premises authentication agent. And in federation with ADFS, it always happens on-premises. So this gives you a good conceptual knowledge of the solution, and that will help you to decide the solution for your customer. For example, is there a TLS certificate requirement, SSL TLS certification requirement In case of password hash synchronization, no. In case of pass-through authentication, no. But when it is ADFS, yes, it requires certificate service through which authentication will work. So all of this will help you to decide on it. And then in the recommendations, some recommendations are there that if you need high availability and disaster recovery scenarios, then you should be doing this for on-premises outage survival and final conclusion. So Microsoft is not concluding anything. What Microsoft is saying that this article outlines various authentication options that you can pick and choose along with scenarios, pick and choose that suits best for your environment. And every environment differs from others. If I'm using pass-through authentication for my customer, doesn't mean that you should use it at your customer also. My customer is different. Their requirements are different. Their investments and objectives are different. Their industry vertical and compliances are different. Yours will be different. So that's about the authentication methods in a hybrid identity scenario. Any question on this? Is everyone with me on this?
Yes, Praveen.
Okay, let's move on. Next, when we were doing the lab number 2, which is configure, when we were doing the lab number 2, which is basically configuring the basic tenant properties. Yep, assigning group membership. I don't see it here, but that's okay. When we were doing that lab, which is basically configuring the tenant properties, there was an option that we almost forgot to configure. So basically that option is company branding, which is very important. You need to know. You typically don't configure it yourself because this is something that is taken care by marketing team or branding team or alliance team, but you should be aware of it, which is what happens when I sign into, when my identities, when they're signing into Azure. At this stage, when I provide my identity information, for example, the moment I say farhan.ahmed@cloudexpert.in, the next screen should basically show me what I want to see. It should show me my company logo. It should have a color that I want. I'm saying instead of this blue color, I want a different color. I want some basic information to be presented on the screen with respect to some expectations from the user with respect to security and privacy, all that. If I have that requirement of personal branding, Microsoft Entra supports it. And it is supported for both Azure, Office 365 portal, admin portal, and Entra Admin Center. So Microsoft Entra supports it. Where exactly do you configure it? You can navigate to Entra, Microsoft Entra ID in Azure portal. There is an option that says company branding. Under manage, there is an option that says company branding. Over here, you can customize the sign-in experience. So we have default sign-in and browser language customization option. We can click on customize here, and now we can select the image that we like. Image size is shown here that the image must be restricted to this. Background image you can select. You can select page background color. All that you can select here for your personal sign-in experience. Layout, you can select how do you want to show it to the user. Full screen background, partial screen background. You can see header, footer. You want to put any cascading, CSS sheet, you can put that here. Next, you can put header logo, what logo you want to show instead of Microsoft Azure. Footer, you can show footer information. Probably you can put privacies, text, URL at the bottom when user will have information about your company. You can put terms of use, all that information here. And you can put your sign-in form like this banner logo, all that information. So this is basically known as customizing sign-in experience for my users and putting my company branding and logo when users sign in, whether they are guest users, whether they are hybrid identities, whether they are member users, cloud only users. So this is something that you need to be aware of, which is company branding. This option is also available in Entra Admin Center. Entra Admin Center sometimes I find tricky because I have also recently started using it. So the best way to look for information is always search for it. You can search for company branding in the search bar. It directly takes you to that option. The UI remains the same as you see in the previous window. So that's an important aspect that you need to be aware of, which is also relates to the uh, the initial configurations of your tenant. This comes under initial configuration. Earlier, this capability was available on this window. On this window, before security defaults, there was a URL that you can, there was a hyperlink that you click and it takes you to the other window where you can configure it. Now they have moved it out from here and put it as a separate branding option. That's the reason in the lab, this option was not there and I almost forgot. So when I was going through the curriculum, SC300 curriculum, it catched my attention and I thought of covering it here. Is everyone with me on this company branding part?
Yes.
All right. So that is all the agenda for today. Actually, we will be starting with this topic, conditional access. We will look into this topic in detail and the capabilities that it brings on the table. And if we are left with some time, we will be starting with privileged identity management almost at the end of the session if we are able to complete conditional access today and we are left with some time. So that's the agenda for the rest of the session. Before we get started with conditional access, let's let's take a break for 10 minutes. Let's calm our mind and let's start with a new topic and then probably just put everything into the permanent memory, shift it to the ROM of your brain so that you can start with something new that you're understanding. All right, guys, let's get started. Next topic we have is conditional access. How many participants in this batch are already working with conditional access or have worked with conditional access policies sometimes in the past? Shiva, what is conditional access? Why do we use it? How does it help? Please explain so that it helps other participants also.
Okay. The conditional access, the policies, the conditional access policies means whenever we need some applications to be accessed by users in some conditional way. Let's say either it can be via some networks only or should be restricted to some users. Whenever we have a requirement for any application access, it should behave differently for different users. That is one case I've seen where conditional access comes into picture. Some examples I would like to give where some applications should be accessible only within office networks. That is one policy I have seen. And there are some policies where certain users from some group should not be triggering the MFA. So we can have policies there as well. So these are some of the scenarios I have seen with respect to conditional access revoke.
All right. That's what Shiva has just mentioned, that we can use conditional access service capability. They are actually policies to allow or deny access from specific network. Let's say I want my Azure portal to be accessible from my corporate network only. That's one requirement. I had this requirement back in 2014. when I used to work for a company, and I'm a MSP, who had their Azure portal compromised. When I say Azure portal compromised, it basically means who had a lot of brute force attack on Azure portal involving their users. So it was an insider threat, basically, that it was concluded as insider threat, wherein somebody from admin team shared login credentials with some external entity. And that external entity tried to exploit those credentials to gain access to the system from multiple locations so that it is not caught red-handed outside of India. This kind of security incident happened back in 2014. At that point in time, we did not have a capability through which we can restrict access to Azure portal based on certain locations or certain IP addresses, which is available today. So before you think of conditional access, let's think of some scenarios that comes to your mind from security perspective. As a security professional, Entra security professional, we know that when it comes to Entra, we have some objects. So we have applications. So we have applications. When I say applications, let's say cloud applications. So we have cloud applications, which are my Microsoft Azure Cloud, Microsoft 365, Microsoft Dynamics, CRM, Microsoft SharePoint Online, federated applications, the one that you register in as part of app registration or enterprise applications. With these applications, plus when I say federated applications, it basically includes both internal as well as external applications. So we have cloud applications, right? That's one entity. We have identities. When I say identities, we have cloud only identities. We have members identities. We have guest identities. As well as managed identities. Applications, identities, then we have devices. We have hybrid devices. When I say hybrid devices, which are joined to on-premises Active Directory, which may have cloud devices. I say cloud directory joined devices. So we have devices, and these devices are running operating systems. Which is either Windows or Linux. I will say iOS also, because some companies use iOS also. Then we have locations. So corporate office locations, branch locations, and cloud regions, as well as geographies. I'm trying to summarize conditional access here. Just think of what you have. Before you even think of security, first you need to understand what you are responsible and accountable for, or how does your infrastructure looks like, what all component it involves. That's the first question that comes to your mind, and visibility of it is very important before you even think of security, right? So we have cloud applications, we have identities. So we have Right. So we have cloud applications, we have identities, we have devices, we have locations. This comprises my environment. Now the question is that I have some specific requirements from security perspective. I want now these identities that I have, these identities combine both my regular users as well as my admin users. These devices combine both my domain joined devices as well as devices that are being used by external identities which are my vendors, contractors, my suppliers, my end users and customers also. These applications I am currently subscribed to. My identities basically access these applications. Not all identities are accessing all the applications, but most of the identities access these applications. The identities that I use, they are basically hosted here in various corporate offices, corporate office locations across multiple geographies, branch locations, cloud regions. When I say managed identity, cloud regions and various geographies that I have my business head. So this is how my business is spread. Now I have some controls in mind. I have some requirements in mind. And based on those requirements, I basically want to take certain decisions. So this is my environment. I'm saying this is what I have. Following is what a business has. That's how we decide. Following is what I have as an admin or a business. Following is what I want. When I say I want, the security that I am looking forward to. This is the level of security that I'm looking forward to, which is my security requirements are this, which is I want to, the following is what I have, following is what I want. So I want to allow or deny access from specific locations or network, which is this, because at each location is governed by a geographical boundary, and then it has an identity, which is IP address. So location and network. Network means IP addresses. I want to allow deny access following spaces, locations, and network. Then I want to allow or deny access to specific users. These users include my regular user as well as admin users. I want to allow or deny access. I want to allow or deny access to specific device also. I would say from devices also. This is what I want. I want to allow deny access from specific locations. I want to allow deny access to specific users. I want to allow access from specific devices. I want to allow or deny access from to specific applications that I have written, and sometimes I want to enforce or throw additional authentication challenge to identities when they sign in from specific device, location, enforce or through additional authentication challenge to identities when they sign in to specific application from a specific device or location. These are the requirements that I have with me. These are the requirements that basically comes to my mind. Now I'm looking for a solution. If these requirements were similar to Microsoft Azure, if you remember last week we did Azure policy. Azure policy basically helped an admin to enforce organizational standards, standards with respect to configuration of services, standards with respect to saving cost, standards with respect to ensuring security of services. So we had some standards in mind. For example, I don't want my virtual machines to be provisioned with public IP. I want to make sure that each and every virtual machine in production network is configured for backup and disaster recovery. I want to make sure that my storage accounts are not accidentally deleted. They are not modified. So those were my requirements. And to satisfy those requirements, I created Azure policies. And with Azure policy in place, I was able to enforce that standard. And if there was any non-compliant service or resource which existed in my Azure subscription, I was able to discover that also. That was Azure policy. Similarly, the answer to this solution, the solution here is Microsoft Entra Conditional Access Policy. This is the solution here. If this is what you want, with what you have this, then the solution is Microsoft Entra Conditional Access Policy. With Microsoft Entra Conditional Access Policy, you can basically control all of these components, all of these applications, identities, devices, and location based on these requirements. You can define who will have access to from which location with which device to which application. That is what you can do. That is known as Entra Conditional Access Policy. This aligns with zero trust approach of Microsoft Entra, or I would say identity and access management. So we have a concept of zero trust. So this basically aligns with zero trust approach, that I don't want to trust. I want to create some policies that will automate the access, whether allow or deny, for certain devices, locations, or identities. So it aligns with zero trust approach of Microsoft Entra. Zero trust basically defines there are three services in Entra that aligns with zero trust, which is conditional access policy, privileged identity management, which comes under least privilege access, and then having identity protection in place, which is like Defender for Identity or Defender XDR. So this aligns with zero trust approach of Microsoft Entra Identity and Access Management. That's what conditional access policy is all about. So now we will see how conditional access policy works and how am I able to achieve each one of this. I will show you some demos here in this lab, in this session, and then you will have entire weekend to think of scenarios that you want to implement. Try and implement it. If you come across any issue, be my guest, share it with me. Make sure to take a screenshot or just share the use case, and we will try and build a solution around it based on the time that we have with us. Okay, so let's understand how conditional access works. This is what the context of conditional access. Let's just look at from Microsoft documentation, what Microsoft documentation has to say about conditional access. So planning for conditional access. Plan conditional access policies. Here's the documentation from Azure. I'll put that documentation in the chat window. All right. So let's look at it. Planning for conditional access policies. Conditional access deployment. Let's first understand what is conditional access. So it says, we can probably click here. It will directly take us to this window. Okay. So it says modern security perimeter extends beyond an organization's network perimeter to include users and device identity. What it says that you don't need to protect your network perimeter because all your identities and devices, they are not restricted to your network perimeter anymore. We are talking about post-pandemic situation wherein identities and devices are spread outside of network. Employees are connecting from remote, a network that is beyond your control, beyond the control of the organization. They are not working from office anymore. They are not using corporate devices all the time. They're also using personal devices. So both devices and identities are beyond your perimeter network now. That's what it tries to say. User, which is identity, and device, they're beyond your perimeter network. And now businesses and organizations, they require more efficient security control to manage these users and devices which are beyond their perimeter. So how do they manage those users and devices? It says that Microsoft Entra Conditional Access brings signals together to make decisions. So we take decisions when I say allow or deny, this one, allow or deny here, allow, deny, allow, deny. This is a decision. Now, who is taking a decision? It's an automated decision which Entra is taking based on the configuration that we do. So Entra is taking an automated decision of whether to allow access or deny access based on certain signals. So these are known as signals. Basically, what you see here, cloud applications, identities, devices, locations, these are known as signals. So based on certain signals, the automated decision will be made to allow access or deny access, or probably not deny access, but to be 100% sure, enforce or through additional authentication challenge. Instead of straight away denying access, you want to give that identity an opportunity to prove who that identity is. That's what you can also do. That's exactly what it says. So Entra access signals together to make decisions and enforce organization policies. Conditional access is Microsoft Zero Trust policy engine, taking signals from various sources into account when enforcing policy decisions. Okay, let's understand this here. So these are signals. Signals basically means my device. Now my device could be in the corporate network. It could be coming from internet, and so it could be outside of the perimeter network. So these are my signals. So it could include my devices, my applications, my identity. So these are my signals. Then what is the decision? Decision basically means that, okay, access will be allowed, full access will be allowed, limited access will be allowed. There is some risk. So to remediate it, limited access will be allowed or access will be blocked. So either access will be allowed or blocked, or with additional authentication, limited access will be allowed. That's the decision. How do you perform enforcement? To what you are enforcing this? You're enforcing this to your locations, based on locations, based on applications, based on devices, and based on, I'm saying applications once again. That's what you're enforcing. So if you want to understand the signals, common signals are this. For example, signals are identities, devices, endpoints. When you have integration with Microsoft Endpoint Manager or Microsoft Device Management, which is Microsoft Intune, then you also can take decisions based on endpoints also. Now, what services are responsible here? Microsoft Entra ID. And since we are talking about endpoints, Microsoft Defender for identity and Microsoft Defender for endpoint also, which is MDE, entire malware solution, and Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which is part of Microsoft Identity Management Solution. So based on these identities, based on these applications. What applications are? It could be any application. It could have any type of data, any infrastructure, any network, and the solutions that involved here is Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Information Protection, Microsoft Cloud App Security. So it also shows you the solutions that basically complements conditional access service. So you can see the signals in detail here. It shows all the applications. This portion is very important, that shows everything. Signals include user or device, user or group membership, which is either it's an identity, which is an individual identity, or is part of a group. Now, when you apply conditional access policies, they can be targeted to specific users and groups, giving administrators fine-grained control over access. So based on a group or an individual user can be given specific access or can be denied access. IP information and location. Organizations can create trusted IP address ranges. They can identify their corporate. So if you have multiple corporate offices, each corporate office has an IP address. You can collate all of that information and create a trusted IP location range, so that all of these IP addresses will be allowed access to when devices, when users from these locations try to access applications that authenticates using Entra. Administrators can specify entire country regions IP ranges to block or allow traffic. So let's say I don't have any customer in Russia, in Ukraine, in Siberia, in Libya, in some African countries, and I don't do business in those countries. So I can restrict those countries or a specific IP range that is reported to have been blacklisted by cyber threat intelligence engine that I use from my EDR and SIEM source solutions. I can restrict those IP addresses or locations to access my applications, whether the request comes from an authentic user. Then comes devices. Users with devices of specific platform, Windows, Linux, iOS, with a specific state, joined to directory, or untrusted device, trusted and untrusted device when enforcing conditional access policies. Use filters for devices to target policies. We can also use filters for devices like privileged access workstations. Applications is another signal. Users attempting to access applications, specific applications like Entra portal, Azure portal, M365 portal, admin portal, Intune portal, or any other application. Real-time and calculated risk detection. Now this requires Entra ID protection. This requires Microsoft Defender for identities and UEBA capability. So what it tries to say that conditional access is not only meant for user device and application as signals, it also means additional capabilities. I'm saying you can integrate conditional access with other security solutions, which is MCAS, Microsoft Defender for Cloud App Security, and it also includes Microsoft Defender for Identity. So it says signal integration with Entra protection allows conditional access policy. In fact, you can integrate it with Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, which you will find here. So one of the application is M365 that you want to govern using conditional access policy. For protecting M365, we have a solution from Microsoft, which is known as Microsoft Defender for Cloud App Security, MCAS. That information that you will find here, since we have not subscribed to, you will find it here, which is Cloud Apps. Cloud App Discovery, Cloud App Catalog, Governance Catalog. Over here, you will see all the information. And here's the policy. This is where policy management happens. So this capability that you see here, I'm saying nothing will come in my case because I don't have license here. That's the reason I'm seeing all of this. So this is the policy management blade for cloud apps. I can also configure policies based on my cloud app configuration, which includes Microsoft 365 applications, or third-party application also. And here I see a couple of policy templates. We will also see a couple of policy templates in conditional access policy. So these are all the templates. For example, new risky app. There's a template whose severity is high. You can just use this template and you can start to configure the policy. So these templates basically gives you, they basically help you to quickly configure a policy based on certain logic which is there in the template. So this is an extension of conditional access policy, something which is outside of the scope of this training, but this is just an FYI for you that if you are working with conditional access policy, don't just think that conditional access policy is only meant for users, device, and applications. The applications that you're aware of. You also have integration available with Microsoft Defender for Identity and Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Okay, so these are my common signals. Now, what are my decisions that I can take? The decisions that I can take is I can block access. Based on these signals, let's say the traffic is coming from Russia and Russia is listed as blacklisted country or region, or the traffic is coming from an IP address which is recorded into the policy as blacklisted IP address, I can directly block access, which is most restrictive decision. I can grant access also. And while I grant access, I can enforce an additional authentication to that request to be 100% sure that it is coming from a legitimate source, legitimate identity, legitimate device, legitimate application, legitimate browser. So if I am granting access, along with granting access, I can also require one of the following options, which is, let's go for MFA. Let's just throw an authentication challenge. Authentication strength. Require devices to mark as compliant. I'm saying somebody is trying to access an application for a device that is not registered with Entra. So instead of granting access directly, you will first through a challenge and ask the device to be compliant, wherein the requester will first need to add that device to Entra, I'm saying by doing some configuration, which is mysignins.microsoft.com, and then navigating to the device and add as a compliant device, then only access it. Require Microsoft Entra hybrid joint device. Require approved client app. Client app basically means a browser. Required app protection policies. Required password change. I can through a password change challenge, or I can require terms of use, which is my terms of use that I've configured in the while I was configuring the tenant, there was an option to provide terms of use URL. So I can put that okay, before I grant you access, please accept these terms, so that I will have a record, a log of that, activity. Now, what are the policies? What are the common policies that you will find in most of the organizations? This is just for the guidance perspective, which is you can require multi-factor authentication for users with administrative roles. If you don't have MFA configured as baseline security parameter in a company, you don't enforce MFAs. It is voluntary. If users want to configure it, they can configure it, but you're not enforcing MFA. In that case, if an administrative user, an identity with administrative role like global admin, security admin, user access administrator, owner role signs in, you will require them to provide multi-factor authentication as an additional requirement after granting access. Requiring multi-factor authentication for Azure management tasks. Blocking sign-in from users attempting to use legacy authentication protocols. Requiring trusted locations for security information registration. Blocking or granting access from specific locations. Blocking risky sign-in behaviors. Requiring organizations manage devices for specific applications. If somebody is trying to access Microsoft Entra Admin Center, which is the brain and heart of my identity and access management solution, then they can only access it from a device which is compliant here. which is listed here and compliant here. That's what you can enforce, requiring organizational managed devices for specific applications. Administrators can create policies from scratch or start from a template policy in the portal. They have started providing you template, which was not available until a couple of months ago, or using the Microsoft Graph API. You can use Graph API, CLI, PowerShell, or Portal. So we will use Portal, and then we can configure the policies. So it basically shows you that this is how the portal looks like. Conditional access under Microsoft Entra Admin Center. You will see conditional access policy. And if you want to know the license, we require a minimum of P1 license for conditional access. However, we want to create risk-based conditional access policy, you need P2 license. Conditional access aligns with zero trust, a principle of Microsoft, which is there are three guiding principles of a zero trust architecture, which is verify explicitly, use least privilege access, and assume breach has happened. So conditional access comes here. It will verify explicitly. Least privilege access is more of a configuration that you will do in Entra by taking advantage of privileged identity management module, PIM module. And assume breach, for this, you have solutions like Microsoft Defender, XDR, that will be configured to ensure that if there is any IOA, indicators of attack, indicators of compromise, indicators of misconfiguration, that is taken care of much before it makes any corruption in your system. So that's what it is. Next is building a conditional access policy step by step. Now, this is something that we are going to do. I will give you a demo of a conditional access policy from the portal, and then we will do a lab with a conditional access policy. So you see a sample policy here. So let's do a policy. Is everyone with me so far? Any questions on this? Let's go ahead and do conditional access policy. So you want to access conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are available on Microsoft Entra Admin Center under protection. So protection is the module. Under protection, you will find conditional access. We have seen identity protection blade where it is related to identity protection. So we will click on conditional access and we see this location. I'm saying we see this blade. Here we see conditional access policies. Before you create conditional access policies, you will need to do some pre-configurations, prerequisites, which is related to informing Entra about your trusted IP addresses, trusted locations, blacklisted IPs and locations. You will need to provide this information to Entra. So, for example, this is the place, named locations. This is where you need to configure. So before we configure the conditional access policy, let's first do some prerequisites. So we will navigate to named location. Here we have options, which is countries, locations, IP address locations, configure multi-factor authentication, trusted IPs, three options. So first we will click on countries locations. It says new locations, countries. As of May last year, both IPv6 and IPv4 are mapped to the countries or regions. So you don't need to worry about it. Now we will name this location. We will say that this is our blacklisted location. It says country lookup method. Determine location by IP address IPv6 or determine location by GPS coordinates. We will determine location by IP address because we would not have access to GPS coordinates, and each country has a defined set of IP addresses provided by INA, which is the governing authority for IP addresses. So by looking at an IP address, I can find out which country does it belong to. So I'm putting a blacklisted location, and my lookup method would be based on IP addresses. Then I can select a location which is blacklisted. For example, I can say Russia, Ukraine, Somalia, and India also, because I need you to show you the validation, I want to show conditional access policy in implementation in real-time working. I'm also adding India as a blacklisted location for a while. So I've created a list of my blacklisted locations. Similarly, I can create a separate list and say that these are my trusted locations. So blacklisted locations. Then I can create another list and I can say this is my trusted location. And I can add trusted locations once again. Let's say UK. Make sure you are not creating conflicting policies. If I have added blacklist India as blacklisted location, I should not be putting India as trusted location at the same time. Otherwise, the policies will conflict, and conflict may result in user accessing the application, and it could be a illegitimate user also, or it could be a hacker also. So let's say I will say United Kingdom, United States as my trusted locations. So I can create blacklisted location, trusted location. I can create IP address locations also. I can manually type the IP addresses, or I can, if I'm using cyber threat intel, if I'm using solutions like Splunk, QRadar, Microsoft Sentinel, they can also populate list of blacklisted IP addresses. Or I can get this information manually from my firewall. So I can download a firewall report and see what all IP addresses it has blocked in the last 1 month. And I can copy all those IP addresses and put it here. So I'm putting a new IP location. I'll say this is my blacklisted IPs. Blacklisted IPs. Now it says mark as trusted location. Or if I don't mark it as trusted location, then they will be blacklisted. I'll say this is my blacklisted IP, and I will put the IP address here. I'm just putting some generic IP addresses like this. This is incorrect. 3445.5. So I need to put valid IPv4 ranges here like this. This is the only IP. Add. I can add more. For example, I want to block some range. I know that this range, which is 192.168.1.0/24. Now this is the private IP range. I can just make it 191. Now it's a public IP range. I can add it. So I can add a specific individual IP address, or I can add the entire IP range also. That's how I need to put. So I'm just showing you how it happens. And I can also upload it in this from a CSV. That's also possible. And I can create it. So this is the pre-work that you do before you configure conditional access policies. So you've done all the pre-work. Similarly, you can create a location of trusted IPs also. For example, IP address location, name, I would say corporate office, mark as trusted, and put an IP address, probably put my own IP address. What is my public IP? This is my public IP. I will put this public IP /32 and I'll add it. And I say this is my trusted location. So this is the pre-work that we need to do. Now, it doesn't mean that you will only have this. You can create multiple ranges, multiple separate ranges, and you can probably, let's say, you don't allow access to Azure portal from a specific location. So you can create multiple corporate offices also. Let's say you will not allow access from India corporate office to Microsoft 365 portal. You will allow access to 365 from US only, and to India, you will only allow access to Microsoft Entra portal. So there could be n number of permutations and combinations that may come to that you may think of. And that's the reason we did this paper exercise, that this is the following that I want, and this is what the business has. So there could be multiple permutations and combinations. So this is the pre-work that you need to do. After you are done with the pre-work, then comes creating the conditional access policy. So let's create a conditional access policy, and let's say that I don't want a specific user or a group to log in to Microsoft Entra portal from a specific location, from a blacklisted location, blacklisted IP address, or from a trust or from a blacklisted location. I don't want. So I will create a policy now. So we'll navigate to policies, and so you can click on policies here, and you can create a policy. You can create a policy from template also. So there is one policy which is there. Let me just delete this policy first. Probably Farhan check this policy. Okay, so we are back. This is how it happens. This is brand new portal. Nothing has been configured yet. Now, the first thing that I will configure is it shows you some introduction of what policies are, is interested in common scenarios. It shows you some common scenarios also, which could be your starting point. These are some common policy templates that you can see. You can configure from one of these templates. So we'll go back and we'll say, okay, let's new policy from a template. So these are the templates. They will directly be available. You just need to fill in the basic information. For example, require multi-factor authentication for admins, securing security registration. All of these are templates. Require MDM enrolled and compliant devices to access cloud applications. So only the devices which are onboarded into Microsoft device management, which is Intune, they can only access some applications. So these are the templates. So let's not use templates. Let's just create a policy from scratch. So we'll create a policy from scratch. And in this policy, I will deny access to a specific user or a group from a blacklisted location. So I'll create a policy, deny access to Microsoft applications from blacklisted locations. That's the policy. Now I'm denying access from a blacklisted location. The first thing that I need to select is user and group. Who do I want to deny access? When you are creating a conditional access policy, make sure you never check the middle radio button. If you check the middle radio button, you may lock out yourself also. Let's say I create this policy that deny access from blacklisted location. And now you already know that India is being configured as blacklisted location. Then I will also be locked out because I'm also part of all users. The account admin will also be logged out. So never ever put all users unless you have tested that policy. The results are based on your expectations and you are ready to deploy it, roll it out to your global network. So we will say that yes, selected users and group. And here I can select roles also. I can select guest or external users also. So for example, there is a policy that I have created for one of my customer, which is that if there is any guest or external user signs in from other than United States, because it's a US customer, they are in North America. So they have some guest users, external users. There is a policy that guest users and external users will be allowed access to their portal and applications from North America only. Outside of North America, no guest user or external user can sign in because you don't have guest users traveling for you. Your full-time employees will do. So we can select directory of guest users. It will populate the list of guest users, local guest users, B2B, all the combinations. You can select directory roles. You can select the roles. So if I select a role, let's say global admin, then all users which has this role will get included here. So be very careful when you select the role because it may have larger implications. So the best bet is to select users and groups. So I will select users and group, and I can probably apply that policy to a specific user or to a group of users. So the best practice says that you will create a group of test users on which you will test and validate policies, implementation, and behavior. And when that implementation and behavior is as per the requirement, then you will roll out to a larger audiences. So I would say I will select a group. I'll select one user for which I will test policy. Let's say this user. I'm testing policy for this user. So I've selected one user. That's the first part where you select. When you're selecting all users, then you also have an option to exclude. You can exclude some users and groups. You can exclude some directory roles. You can exclude some guest users or external. So that's what you can also do when you're selecting all users. So I've selected one user. I'm done with the first option. Next is target. Target resource. What that target resource is. It doesn't mean that you will configure all of it. Sometimes you can create a policy with limited options. Sometimes you can take into account all of it. So my target resource is next. Here I will select my target resource, that what is the resource, what is the destination that I want to do. So it says target resource could be a cloud app, an application, user action, global access, authentication context also. I'll say cloud app. Then I can include all applications. Never ever do that. Entra itself is telling you don't lock out yourself. You will lock yourself. So let's do it for a specific app. So I'm selecting a target resource. It says filter. You can put a filter also here, which is configured. So you can put a filter based on some expression, which is like dynamic rules that you've created. So we'll click on select app. Here we can select an application. Now, since Microsoft is very dynamic, they keep on changing things. Let's say if I want this for Microsoft Entra portal, then I can type Microsoft admin portals. And you can see this admin portal application includes Microsoft 365 Admin Center, Exchange Admin Center, Azure Portal, Microsoft Entra Admin Center, and other admin, which includes intune.microsoft.com, teams.microsoft.com, all Microsoft admin portals. So I say Microsoft admin portal. I've selected Microsoft admin portal. You can also select additional applications like cloud app security or other applications which are integrated. So right now I'm selecting Microsoft portal. I'll select. So I've selected the application. I've selected the user. Next, network. It says new. They have added this new capability, which is network and locations determined by IP address and locations. So I will select my network here now. So I will say configure yes, and I can select any network or location, all trusted network of location, selected network and locations. So I select selected network and location, and I will choose my network here. It will populate all that I put here. So I put here, which is blacklisted locations. So I'm selecting blacklisted locations as my network. And you know that in blacklisted locations, I have added India as blacklisted locations. So I've selected that part also. Then comes conditions. Do you want to include any conditions? Conditions based on risk, sign-in risk, insider risk, device platform. I say what device that user is including, what client app that user is including. You can include the client app also, which is configure browser modern authentication client app. These are browser if they are trying to access from browser and whatnot. So you can include there also. So I just not do it right now. But these are all the options available. Then filter for devices, authentication flows you can configure. You can configure device platform also, which is here. So I can say select a device platform, which is Windows. So I'm selecting Windows here in the policy. So what is happening if let's complete it, then understand the policy. Then access control last, which is what access control I'm putting here. I will say block access because my network is selected as blacklisted locations. So I'm blocking access. I've selected the control. And in the end sessions, I can also select on sessions. This is basically when you allow access with additional factor authentications, you can also select these options so this you select when you have selected the grant action with some additional controls. So we will just close here. So my policy is created and I am enabling this policy for reporting only. Reporting only basically means that the policy will not restrict, but it will report the behavior. I will say, no, turn on this policy. It looks like you are about to manage your organization's security configurations. That's great. You must first disable security default before enabling a conditional access policy. So I will navigate to, I will open duplicate tab. Or I already have opened it here. Here I will go to Microsoft Entra ID, properties. At the bottom, I have security defaults. I will disable it. And I will say I am using, my organization is planning to use conditional access. That's it. That's it. So security defaults are disabled. Now I'll go back to this window and I will say create. Let's create this policy. So I should have disabled security default before, because now it doesn't understand that it is disabled because it is not getting synchronized. So I say I have no option but to start from scratch, but I will quickly do that. So I will refresh this portal. And I will configure the conditional access policy real quick once again. Conditional access, policies, new policy. Select the user for which I'm applying the policy. Resource. I'll select application. Microsoft admin portal. I'll select network. Selected network. None. Blacklisted locations. I'll select condition. Location is already included. I'll also select device platform here, which is Windows. Windows. Locations is already included. I will select block access. That's it. Turn on the policy and create this policy. So I'm creating a policy in which a user, Radha, if trying to sign in from a blacklisted location, which happens to be India also, using a Windows device, trying to authenticate to Microsoft admin portals, which is Entra ID and other portals, will be blocked access. The access will be blocked for this user. So policy is created. Now we will see the applicability of this policy or implementation of this policy, right? So let's see the applicability of this policy. on another browser in India from a Windows device, I will try to authenticate. So user types the login credentials, hit next. It will ask you for the password. Even I don't remember the password for user. Okay. We need to do one additional exercise, which is we need to go and change the password for this user also. And see, conditional access policy is triggering here. So as soon as user provided the authentication credentials, username and password, the conditional access policy is triggering. It says your sign-in was successful. I'm saying your credentials are correct. However, it does not meet the criteria to access this resource. For example, you might be signing in from a browser app or location that is restricted by your admin. Sign out and sign in with a different account, or let's get more details. In more details, user will not be able to figure out anything. It will only say what user is currently using. For example, error code will not tell anything. It will say app name, Azure portal, app ID, IP address of the user, device identifier is not available, device platform is Windows 10, and device state is unregistered. This device is not registered to the tenant or directory that this user is trying to sign in. That's how conditional access policy is working. Now, if I want this user to be able to sign in, that is where the security risk also lies. So what we can do, we can go to this conditional access policy and we can say, now understand the capability here. We can go to conditions. There are conditions on devices and location, right? So we'll go to device and we will say iOS. Instead of Windows, we will say iOS and we will hit say done. So now I've selected a device which is iOS instead of Windows. Location continues to remain the same as I selected, which is blacklisted location. You can see here blacklisted location. It continues to remain the same. And then the grant access is block access. Everything else remains the same. I have only changed the device from Windows to iOS. And now I will save this policy, modify this policy. Policy is modified. I'll come back here, close this, and try to sign in once again. Now tell me whether I will be able to sign in or not. What do you think, guys? Will I be able to sign in with the same user or not? Any participant?
You should be able
Reshma?
to.
I should be able to. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Because you have changed it to iOS device.
Okay, but the location still continues to remain the same. It's a blacklisted location,
Okay.
right? Location still continues to remain the same. So if you go by that logic, and say if I go by your logic, you're
It
true
should.
that I should
Yeah.
be able to sign in because I'm not using Windows. But understand the other condition in the policy that says location. Location continues to remain India, well, blacklisted location continues to remain the same, and India is part of that list. So this user is going to sign from India from iOS, which means it's a conflicting situation, right? Let's see what will happen. When you learn a service, learn it this way. Put conflicting situations and see how it happens in conflicting situations. And then what is the solution to avoid that conflict? That's what you need to learn as as a Entra professional or Entra SME. What is happening? She is able to sign in. It is asking for authentication because that's what I configured for this user yesterday. So I'll provide the authentication. We will wait till end and see whether she is able to sign in or not. I'm just waiting for the code to refresh. Since the password was changed, it is asking to change the password. And there we go. She is able to sign in. So she is able to sign in because the policy has conflicting conditions. You should not put conflicting conditions in the policy. If it's a blacklisted location, then it's blacklisted once and for all, for everyone. How can you create a conflict in the policy by writing that from a blacklisted location, I will allow access from Mac device, but not from Windows? What is the logic? It doesn't sound good, right? What you can do, and that's what you need to understand when you write policies, because this is where, when I do an audit for a customer, audit for an Entra ID configuration, this is where I find a lot of conflicting policies. These conflicting policies are loophole in the system. Because of this conflicting policy, if Radha's identity is compromised, hackers will be able to gain access to the system, because you will have multiple policies here and some policies have conflicting situation. You should not have conflicting policies. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Reshma, Pallavi?
Yes, sir.
Great. All right. So how should I fix it? If I want to fix it, if I want to fix this policy and configure this policy for a production environment, I will navigate to these two conditions. I'm saying on the conditions, and on the device platform, I will configure no. I don't need to configure any device as long as it is a blacklisted location, then entire access will be blocked irrespective of the device, irrespective of the user, whether it's an administrator, whether it's a regular user, everything will be blocked. So I will need to fix that part and then it will work. So this is how you can do. Let's take an example of another policy. The another policy is administrators are typically privileged people. If they want, they can avoid multi-factor authentication also. They can always avoid that. They can avoid SSPR. It is not applicable for them. So they are privileged people. And sometimes privileged peoples are risk for your environment. So what I want to take some precautions. Precautions like, if my administrators are signing to some admin portal or for some security specific application, then I want multi-factor authentication to be enabled for my administrators. For example, if I navigate to a users in group, and select this user, Farhan, he is my admin user. So I'll select user. I will typically have a group wherein all my admins will be there. I will say target resource. selected apps, select, and here I will say Microsoft, which is the same application, all Microsoft admin portals. Network, it is not mandatory that you configure network. It hardly makes any difference. If Farhan, if my administrator is logging into my admin portals, I will directly say the condition. These are the conditions, client tab, filter for devices, all of these information you have here. I can put a condition that if my administrator is logging in to admin portals, then the device platform, I'm saying, not this device platform, I can put a condition to the device platform. I'm saying I can include the device platform, or I would say that I'm saying I can define on apps, I can filter for devices like this, all of this, all the filtering is available. So I will directly say that my administrator is signing in, then I will grant access to my administrators. However, I would require multi-factor authentication. And I would also require the device to be marked as compliant. Which basically means that if Farhan is signing in from a device which is not compliant, which is not registered, which is not compliant as per MDM policies, Microsoft Device Management, which is Intune, or which is not registered with Entra ID, which is not a registered device or managed device, we will not be able to sign in. And I can also put approved client application list here. And it says require all the selected controls, require one of the selected controls. So in case of admins, there are two selected controls which I would always need, which is they need multi-factor authentication and they require marked device to be compliant all the time. Then only they will be able to access. So I select it and it says policies in report. I will turn on the policy and I will create it. I forgot the name. I'll say sample policy just to save time here. Create. So I've created this policy. If I go to the user Farhan, this is the user. You know that this is my admin user. Because he has global admin role, you can see. So he's my admin user. And you can see in the devices list, Farhan doesn't have a device marked as compliant. So with that policy in place, with this policy in place, if Farhan tries to sign in, Farhan will not be able to sign in. Because he will be able to get through the multi-factor authentication, but he will not be able to mark his device compliant because the device is not Entra ID joined or device is not onboarded into MDM. So this is another policy that we typically configure in a production environment wherein we restrict administrators to use admin portals from a device which is not compliant, because non-compliant device may have keylogger softwares on it, may have malwares on it, may have some security misconfiguration on it, and that may corrupt identity, that may compromise identity. So I want to protect the identity of my admin users or my administrators. Is everyone with me on this? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's do the lab now, real quick. So our lab is lab number 9, which is conditional access policy. Let me share the lab with you. There are two labs that we will do on this topic. All right. So these are the labs that we need to do. I'll quickly explain. One lab you will do right here in the session, which will hardly take much time. And the two labs I will share for the home assignments. So lab number 13 is implement and test conditional access policy that we will be doing in the session. Lab number 14, you will be doing, we are skipping some labs in between, which is related to virtual machines that I will do on Monday when we talk about virtual machine, right, with privileged identity management. So lab number 14 and 15 is your weekend assignments lab. And lab number 13 is what you are doing right now. I've just put that into the chat window. Did everyone receive it? Can you check, guys, and confirm? Okay, let's talk about lab number 13 real quick. And when I'm covering this lab, guys, as I said, in a training, I can only cover scenarios that comes to my mind, which I primarily see getting used most often in a production environment. That's exactly what I'm doing. However, your environment may be different. If you have specific scenarios from your business related to this service, conditional access, wherein you have certain doubts or you were not able to probably address a specific problem statement from your customer, bring it to my notice. If it is something that can be done within the limited time frame, we will discuss it in the training. Else, I will put that into the consulting spreadsheet, which I'm collating by taking information from you, for which we will have a separate session after this training is over, and we will look into building that solution from scratch, which may require some automation, which may require some integration, which may require some federated identity, but we'll be building it. And that will help me to propose the same solution in future to other clients, and that will help you to take care of the current requirement from your customer. So that's the ultimate goal here. Now let's understand the conditional access policy. So it says that for conditional access policy, security defaults must be turned off. So please make sure that you turn it off before creating it. Set a conditional access policy to block this user from accessing Sway. So you're creating a conditional access policy. First of all, Sway is a product from Office 365. You forgot about it. You just focus on Azure management, Microsoft management portals or Microsoft admin portals, and do the conditional access policy for that. First of all, they're checking whether this user is able to access. So they confirm that yes, this user is able to access this application from office.com. You will check whether a user is able to access Entra admin portal or not. Then you will create a conditional access policy to block this access. And here it shows you all the information. They are selecting in the application pane, cloud application pane, Sway as application, but you will select Microsoft admin portals. And in the block access, you will select block access in the grant pane, and then you will enable the policy, turn on, and create it. This is how it would look like from the screenshot perspective. And once this is completed, it says open, test the conditional access policy. You will go and test the policy by basically imitating as user, impersonating at user, and trying to access that application. And you will see that it says you don't have access to this site because you don't have permissions. I'm saying the message could be different. That's what you will do. So that way you will confirm that yes, she is able to access it. Then you will test conditional access policy with what if scenario. What if scenario basically means that you will test the conditional access policy, you will create a conditional access policy and select in the policies what if, and then you will put user or workload identity. I'm saying what if scenario, you will also test here. This is another lab that you will do over here. And then this is what you need to do. So please make sure that you do this lab. Let me explain the other two labs that you can do over the weekend. Access policy. In this lab, you are basically enabling sign-in and user risk policies. Again, in the conditional access policy itself. So under conditional access policy, you see identity protection. There you see user risk policies. This is conditional access policy. It's just that it has its own separate view. So you create a user risk policy wherein you select the user and you select the risk for that user. So that's what you do in this lab. It's a short lab, but this is risk-based conditional access basically. Then there is another lab, which is lab number 15, wherein you are configuring conditional access policies based on MFA registration. So as I said, MFA is a, MFA, when you enable MFA for a user has an option to skip it for 15 days, 14 days, unless you enforce it. Instead of enforcing the MFA, you can also enforce it in a different manner, wherein you can create a multi-factor registration policy, a conditional access policy that will prompt user to configure MFA. So you can see multi-factor authentication provides a mean to verify who you are more than just a username and password. It provides a second layer of protection. For users to be able to respond to MFA prompt, they must first register for MFA. And that's where it says you must configure your Microsoft Entra organization's MFA registration policy to be assigned to all users. Now, this policy you will assign to all users. And with this policy in place, all users will be prompted for MFA. They will have to configure it on their next login. And if they don't configure it, they will not be able to sign into applications. So that's where you're creating this policy. Under identity protection, after user risk policy, you have MFA registration policy. You will just select all user and enable the policy and enforce this policy. What will happen? Your users will have to configure the MFA, and this is for all users. So instead of selecting all users, you can probably select some of the users and configure it. So that's the lab number 15, which is related to conditional access once again. So this is about conditional access policies. Let's see if there are other options here that I can quickly explain. So in the conditional access policies, once again, when we go to overview, I'm saying click on conditional access policies, and here you see the policies. So you have all of this information that you need to be aware of also. So you click on identity protection, and here you see conditional access. You can navigate to conditional access from there also, or you can come back and you can click on user risk policies here. That's how you create user risk policies. Here sign-in risk policy is here. Now this all requires P2 license. Remember, multi-factor registration policy you can also create for your users. You can select all users or individual users. So probably just do this lab by selecting some users instead of all users. Right? So that's how you can do this policy, and this control is by default enabled, which is required MFA Entra multi-factor authentication registration. So this is how you can put policy enforced and save it. So this is your policies for the protection perspective. What is the additional option that we have here is under protect. We have this, then report. You can also report for risky users. If you want to report the risky user policy that you will create here, when that policy is in force, if those risky users are signing in, you will see all those reports here. If you want to detect for risk, you will see the information here. If there is any risky user, you can see here risky detection details has come from this risky user, because this Entra admin is signing in from this IP, and it's an unfamiliar sign-in operations. So the risk is the following properties is the same and unfamiliar user, because the user is signing in from the location Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So this is a risk. Why this is coming as a risk? Because if you remember, my usage location for this user is India. And when I was configuring on 17th of September, Microsoft Entra Connect a demonstration when I was doing. I logged into the virtual machine, which is in Canada Central, which is in Ontario, Canada, and I logged into the virtual machine from there. So since I'm an admin user, global admin user, it's a detection. So Entra could detect that it could be a risk. How come a user, an admin user is signing in from Ontario, Canada, when the usage location is India? If I had user risk policy enabled, that would have blocked my sign in then and there. So this is the reporting part that you can see over here. And this is the dashboard that basically shows you a glimpse of what this is all about. So that is all for today, guys. That's all I wanted to cover. Let's understand the agenda for next week, for Monday. In the next session, our focus will be on identity governance. And under identity governance, I'll just type the agenda for Monday. We will start with PIM, which is Privileged Identity Management. And when we are done with PIM, our next will be Entitlement Management. This is the agenda for Monday, next session. Is everyone with me on this? Great. All right, guys. I think you guys are already in hurry. Some of the participants have already left. Probably they have some important business assignments to take care of, or they already are aware of this service, or they actually don't need to learn this service at all. It's either or. So whichever is the case, the session recordings will be made available to you today itself. Please make sure that you watch the recorded session. And if you have interest in conditional access policy, please look for some permutations and combinations that comes to your mind, configure the policies accordingly, look for their implementation and end results. If they are not as per your expectation, make a note of it and share it with me on Monday. We will work together and then ensure that it works well, or I will tell you where exactly you are getting it wrong, whether it's a logic error, whether it's a, whether it is the conditions error that we will discuss. So with that said, we can close the session for today. I will see you all on Monday in the morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you all. You all have a great rest of the day. Happy learning. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.